They say blood is thicker than water, but in this family, blood is merely a solvent used to wash away the debts of a golden sun. I always imagined hell was fire and brimstone, yet I realized it actually smells like fresh oak and sounds like the laughter of people who betrayed their own grandchild. You think $87,000 is just a number? No. That is the precise price of a conscience. My name is Lorelei Bracken. At 34 years old, I exist in the background of my own life. I work as a senior auditor for Vanguard Logistics, a job that suits me perfectly because it requires me to be invisible, meticulous, and obsessed with the small details that everyone else ignores. I spend my days tracking shipping containers and reconciling balance sheets, ensuring that every number sits in its correct column. It is a life of quiet order, a stark contrast to the chaotic, performative theater that is my family. If you were to look at a group photo of the Bracken clan, I would be the one slightly out of focus in the back row, half obscured by a potted plant or the shadow of my older brother, Preston. I have spent 3 decades apologizing for taking up space, conditioning myself to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention fall from the table. But I am not writing this story to tell you about my talent for fading into the wallpaper. I am writing this because of Alara, and because of a wooden box that held the soul of a woman I never got the chance to truly know. Alara is 12 years old. She is my daughter, my entire world, and she possesses a gift that terrifies me as much as it awes me. When Alara sits behind her cello, the awkward, gangly preteen who stammers when ordering a pizza disappears. Her spine straightens, her chin lifts, and her fingers dance across the fingerboard with a precision that seems ancient, inherited from a bloodline that skipped me entirely. The cello she plays is not an ordinary instrument. It is a Matteo Goffriller original from the early 19th century, a dark, honey-colored masterpiece of craftsmanship that was appraised last year at $87,000. It belonged to my grandmother, Constance, a woman whose name is spoken in my parents' house with a mixture of reverence and fear, mostly because she controls the family trust. To my parents, Richard and Sylvia Bracken, the cello is a status symbol. It is an artifact to be mentioned casually at cocktail parties to impress their country club friends. They love the idea of having a prodigy granddaughter. They love the appraisal value, but they despise the reality of it. That is the cruel irony of our arrangement. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown New Haven that suffers from the erratic mood swings of New England weather. In the summer, it is a humidity trap. In the winter, the dry radiator heat cracks skin and lips. It is no place for a delicate antique instrument that requires a constant humidity level of 45% and a temperature of 68 degrees. So, against every instinct screaming in my gut, we keep the cello at my parents' house in Greenwich. Their home is a sprawling colonial revival mansion that looks like it was generated by an artificial intelligence asked to design the perfect American dream. It has manicured hedges, a 3-car garage, and a climate control system sophisticated enough to preserve the Dead Sea Scrolls. Inside, there is a dedicated music room. It was once my grandmother's sanctuary before she moved to France. It is lined with soundproofing velvet and shelves of sheet music that smell of vanilla and old paper. It is the only room in that house that feels alive. It is where Alara's cello lives, trapped in its carbon fiber case like a sleeping dragon waiting for its rider. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I drive Alara to Greenwich. The routine is always the same. We park in the circular driveway, careful not to block Preston's Porsche if he happens to be visiting, which he usually is. We enter through the side door because the front door is for guests, and apparently, family does not qualify. My mother, Sylvia, is usually in the sunroom, nursing a glass of Chardonnay regardless of the hour. She is a woman who has aged not by growing older, but by tightening. Her face is a roadmap of cosmetic interventions, pulled so taut that her expressions range only from mild disdain to polite indifference. "You are late," she would say, not looking up from her iPad. "Traffic on I-95 was bad." "Mom," I would reply, the automatic apology rising in my throat. "Alara, wipe your shoes. The maid just did the floors." Alara would shrink into herself, mumbling a yes, ma'am, and hurry toward the music room. I would stay behind, serving as the buffer, the lightning rod for whatever passive-aggressive storm was brewing that day. My father, Richard, is a man who measures worth in liquidity and volume. He loves loud things, loud cars, loud laughter, loud suits. He finds the cello depressing. "It sounds like a funeral in there," he told me once, swirling the ice in his scotch. "Why can't she play something upbeat like that electric violin girl on YouTube?" "It is classical music, Dad. It is supposed to have depth." "It is whining. That is what it is. $87,000 for a box that whines." Yet, when their friends came over for dinner parties, the narrative flipped. I have stood in the hallway, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres like a servant, listening to my father boast to a room full of investors. "Oh yes, our granddaughter is a virtuoso. The cello has been in the family for generations. We are nurturing the arts." It is a burden, of course, giving up so much space in the house for her practice, but we make sacrifices for family. They would nod and toast to his generosity, unaware that 10 minutes prior, he had turned up the volume on the television to drown out Alara's practice of Bach's cello suites. The dynamic in the Bracken household has always been a simple equation: Preston is the asset. I am the liability. Preston is 2 years older than me. He has started 5 businesses in the last 10 years, and all 5 have failed spectacularly. There was the artisanal bottled water company, the app for walking other people's iguanas, and the solar-powered yacht venture that sank literally and financially. Each time he failed. My parents were there with a checkbook and a soothing word. "Preston is a visionary," my mother would say. "The market just is not ready for his genius yet." Meanwhile, I paid my own way through college, secured a stable job, bought my own car, and raised a brilliant daughter as a single mother. In their eyes, I am boring, I am safe, I am the Toyota Camry of children reliable, but you would not want to park me in the front driveway. But this weekend was supposed to be different. This weekend was everything. Alara had been preparing for 6 months for the National Youth Orchestra audition. It is the kind of opportunity that changes a young musician's trajectory forever. If she got in, she would tour Europe in the summer. She would study under the masters. It was her ticket out of the invisible life I had inadvertently bequeathed to her. The audition was scheduled for Monday morning. We had planned a heavy practice session for Saturday and Sunday. Alara needed to refine the second movement of the Elgar Concerto. She needed the acoustics of the music room. She needed the weight of that specific bow in her hand. It was Friday afternoon, just past 4 o'clock, when my phone buzzed on my desk at Vanguard. I was deep in a spreadsheet, looking for a missing zero in a shipping manifest. I saw the name Mom flash on the screen and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the Pavlovian response of a child who knows they are about to be criticized. I unlocked the phone. It was a text message. "My mother does not call unless someone has died or she needs tech support. Lorelei, do not come over this weekend. Dad and I are having some cleaning done. The house is a mess. Stay home." I stared at the screen. The blue light seemed to burn into my retinas. Cleaning my parents employed a housekeeping service that came every Wednesday like clockwork. They never lifted a finger, and even if they were doing a deep clean, why would that stop Alara from practicing in the music room? The music room was in the east wing, isolated from the main living areas. I typed back, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Mom, we have to come. Alara has the national audition on Monday. She needs the cello. We will stay in the music room and won't get in your way." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, the reply. I said no. "Lorelei, it is too chaotic here. Let the girl rest. She practices too much anyway. It is annoying the neighbors." The neighbors lived 3 acres away behind a stone wall. They could not hear a jet engine taking off from our patio, let alone a 12-year-old playing the cello inside a soundproofed room. A cold, slippery feeling coiled in my stomach. It was not panic. Not yet. It was instinct. It was the auditor in me looking at a column of numbers and realizing the sum did not match the parts. Something was missing. The explanation did not fit the data. I packed up my bag, my hands trembling slightly as I shut down my laptop. I drove to pick up Alara from her middle school. She was waiting on the curb, her backpack slumped against her legs, her fingers air-bowing a melody only she could hear. When she saw my car, she smiled, but it was a tight, nervous smile. She was living in the shadow of Monday. "Ready for the marathon?" she asked as she climbed in, buckling her seatbelt. "I want to run the scales for an hour before tackling the Elgar." I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the traffic light as it turned from red to green. I could not tell her. I could not tell her that her grandmother, the woman who claimed to love the arts when her friends were watching, had just barred the doors. "Elara," I started, trying to keep my voice even, trying to sound like the capable adult I was supposed to be. "Grandma texted. She said they are doing some cleaning this weekend. She wants us to skip practice." Alara went rigid. The air bowing stopped. She turned to me, her eyes wide and dark, reflecting the dashboard lights. "What, Mom? I can't. The audition is Monday. I need the cello. I can't play the rental. The bridge is too high, and the A string buzzes. You know that." "I know, honey, I know. Did you tell her?" Alara's voice rose an octave, cracking with the onset of panic. "Did you tell her it is the national audition?" I tried. I lied. I had told her, and she did not care. That was the truth, but it was a truth that would hurt too much. "Look, maybe we can just go over there for an hour just to grab the cello, then you can practice at our place. I will crank up the humidifier. We will boil pots of water on the stove if we have to." Alara nodded frantically. Yes, let's just get it. I don't care about the acoustics. I just need my instrument." I merged onto the highway, heading north toward Greenwich. The drive usually took 40 minutes. Today, it felt like an eternity. The closer we got to my parents' zip code, the heavier the air felt. "It is weird," Alara whispered, looking out the window at the passing trees, stripped bare by the November wind. "Grandma never cleans on weekends. That is when she holds court." "I know," I said. "And why would she care if I practice? She usually just turns up the volume on QVC." "I know," I repeated. "Mom," Alara turned to me, and for a second, she didn't look 12. She looked older, burdened by a premonition she couldn't articulate. "Do you think something happened to it? To the cello?" I forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Of course not. It is in the music room. It is safe. It is probably just Preston. You know how he gets. He probably crashed there with a bunch of friends and made a mess. And Mom doesn't want us to see it." That was a plausible theory. Preston often treated the house like his personal fraternity lodge. It would explain the cleaning excuse. It would explain the refusal to let us in. But as I took the exit for the upscale suburbs of Greenwich, passing the wrought iron gates and the manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than my annual salary, the knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, cold stone. I remembered the last time I was there, 2 days ago. I had seen my father standing in the music room, staring at the cello. He wasn't looking at it with annoyance, as he usually did. He was looking at it with calculation. He was looking at it the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, estimating the yield. I had dismissed it then, thinking he was just mentally complaining about the space it took up. Now, that memory replayed in my mind, looped and distorted. "Mom, you are driving really fast," Alara said, gripping the door handle. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing 80 in a 55 zone. I eased off the gas, but my heart rate didn't slow down. "We are just going to grab it," I said, more to myself than to her. "We will walk straight to the music room, grab the case, and leave. 5 minutes. They won't even have time to complain." "Okay," Alara breathed. "Okay." She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were calloused at the tips from pressing against steel strings for 4 hours a day. They were the hands of a worker, an artist, a creator. My parents had hands that were soft, manicured, and only skilled at signing checks or holding wine glasses. I squeezed back. "It is going to be fine," I said, but as we turned the corner onto their street, lined with oak trees that stood like silent sentinels, I saw the truck. It was not a cleaning service van. It was not a landscaping truck. It was a massive, sleek black box truck parked right in front of my parents' driveway. The logo on the side was elegant, scripted in gold leaf, but I could not read it from this distance. I pulled into the driveway, blocking the truck in. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Mom." Alara's voice was barely a whisper. "Stay here," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "No," she said, already opening her door. "I am coming with you." We walked toward the front door. The house loomed over us, grand and imposing, its windows like indifferent eyes. I reached for my key, the spare one they gave me for emergencies, though they always changed the alarm code without telling me. I didn't need the key. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of cleaning products. It wasn't the scent of lemon pledge or bleach. It was the smell of fresh paint, and underneath that, the distinct, sharp scent of sawdust and silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt less like peace and more like the vacuum left after a bomb has detonated. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed in the foyer. No answer. Alara didn't wait. She bolted past me, her sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor. She knew the way. Down the main hall, take a left at the library, and straight to the music room. "Alara, wait," I shouted, running after her, but she was already rounding the corner. I heard her footsteps stop abruptly. Then, I heard a sound that I will carry with me to my grave. It was not a scream. It was a gasp, a hollow, ragged intake of breath, as if all the oxygen had been violently ripped from her lungs. I ran the last few steps and skid to a halt beside her. I looked into the room, and I felt my world, and hers, shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The space before us was not a room. It was a crime scene where history had been murdered and replaced by a showroom floor. My brain struggled to reconcile the geography of the house with what my eyes were seeing, a cognitive dissonance that made me physically dizzy. For 12 years, this room had been a sanctuary of acoustic perfection, lined with cork and velvet, smelling of rosin, old paper, and the specific, dusty warmth of a grand piano. Now, it smelled of aggressive industrial chemicals, the sharp, high-pitched sting of fresh latex paint, and the cloying, leather shop scent of new furniture. It was the smell of money spent rapidly and without taste, a scent I associated with my parents' manic phases of acquisition. Alara stood frozen beside me. Her small hand, which had been gripping my wrist, went limp, dropping to her side like a dead weight. She did not make a sound. She did not cry out. She simply ceased to function. I watched her eyes dart frantically across the space, searching for an anchor, for a familiar landmark that might tell her she was still in reality. There were none. The custom-built humidity cabinets that had housed my grandmother Constance's collection of sheet music were gone. In their place stood a wet bar made of black marble and chrome, backlit by tacky blue LED strips that hummed with a low-frequency electric buzz. The shelves that had held busts of Bach and Beethoven had been ripped out, the walls smoothed over and painted a sterile, cold gray that sucked the warmth out of the afternoon light. But the centerpiece of this desecration, the object that dominated the wall where the cello had once stood in its honored place, was a television screen. It was monstrous, easily 100 inches diagonally, a black void that reflected our horrified faces back at us. It was flanked by tower speakers that looked like monoliths from a dystopian future. The room was no longer a place of creation. It was a place of passive consumption. It was a media room, the kind you see in brochures for bachelor pads in Miami, not in a colonial estate in Connecticut. "Where is it?" Alara whispered. Her voice was so small it barely registered over the hum of the new refrigerator behind the bar. I stepped into the room, my boots sinking into a plush. White shag carpet that felt obscene underfoot. The old hardwood floor's original oak planks that reverberated beautifully with the cello's lower register were either covered or gone. I felt a wave of nausea. The acoustics were dead. The room felt suffocatingly insulated, designed to keep the noise of blockbuster movies in. Rather than letting music breathe, "Mom," I said, though I knew she wasn't in the room yet. I was speaking to the house itself, to the walls that had witnessed this betrayal. "Where is the cello?" Alara walked forward, her movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. She approached the spot where her chair usually sat. There was nothing there but a low-slung leather sectional sofa that looked like it cost more than my car. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the back of the sofa, as if expecting her fingers to pass through it and find the smooth, varnished wood of her instrument underneath. "It's gone," Alara said. Her voice broke on the last word. "The stand, the humidity gauge, the case. Mom, the case is gone." I scanned the room desperately. Maybe they had just moved it. Maybe it was in the corner, behind the bar. Shoved into a closet. I ran to the built-in storage units on the far wall. I yanked the doors open. Empty. Just the smell of fresh laminate. I checked behind the heavy velvet blackout curtains. Nothing. The panic that had been a cold stone in my stomach during the drive now exploded into hot, searing terror. This wasn't just a cleaning. The text message from my mother, dad, and I are having some cleaning done was a lie so massive it was almost impressive in its audacity. You do not install a wet bar and a home theater system in a weekend. This had been planned. The contractors, the truck outside, the wiring, the painting, this had been in motion for weeks. They had waited until the very last moment, until the paint was barely dry, to tell us not to come. And the cello, my God, the cello. It was an extension of Alara's body. That instrument, the Matteo Goffriller, was not just an asset. It was the only thing my grandmother had left directly to Alara, bypassing my father's greedy fingers through a complex trust structure I had thought was ironclad. It was the voice through which my daughter spoke to the world. Without it, she was just a quiet, awkward girl. With it, she was a titan. Alara moved toward the wall where the humidity control system used to be mounted. She ran her fingers over the smooth, gray paint. Her touch was light, reverent, and heartbreaking. She was mourning the building itself. "They painted over the marks," she said, tears finally spilling over her lashes, tracking hot paths down her pale cheeks. "Mom, the pencil marks where we measured my height last year, they painted over them." My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a primitive, violent urge to pick up one of the crystal decanters on the new bar and smash it into the 100-inch screen. I wanted to destroy this room the way they had destroyed hers. "We will find it," I said, my voice sounding harsh and foreign in the deadened air of the room. "Alara, look at me. We will find it. They probably moved it to the guest room or the library, but I knew I was lying. You do not renovate a music room into a media cave and carefully store a nearly 200-year-old instrument in the guest room. You treat it as an obstacle. You treat it as clutter." I turned around, needing to find someone, anyone, to scream at. The hallway behind us was empty, but the silence of the house had changed. I could hear footsteps now, slow, deliberate footsteps clicking against the marble of the foyer. They were not the heavy, lumbering steps of the workmen. They were the sharp, staccato clicks of designer heels. Alara wiped her face with her sleeve, her breathing hitching into shallow gasps. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "They didn't move it. Mom, I can feel it. It's not in the house." "Don't say that," I snapped, purely out of fear. "Do not say that." "It's cold," she said, shivering, though the thermostat on the wall read 72 degrees. "The house feels empty." I grabbed her shoulders, trying to ground her, trying to ground myself. "Alara, listen, Grandma and Grandpa are selfish. Yes, They are thoughtless, but they know what that cello means to you. They know it is worth a fortune. They wouldn't. I trailed off. The sentence died in my throat because, deep down, I knew exactly who my parents were. They were people who saw value only in what could be liquidated or displayed. A cello hidden in a case was neither. A home theater they could show off to Preston's friends. That was currency. The footsteps stopped at the doorway. I spun around. My mother, Sylvia Bracken, stood framed in the entrance of the media room. She looked impeccable, as always. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere cardigan and tailored slacks that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect, immovable helmet. In her right hand, she held a large glass of white wine, the condensation on the bowl of the glass catching the light from the tacky blue LEDs behind the bar. She didn't look shocked to see us. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look apologetic. She looked annoyed. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for dust specks. Before finally landing on us, her gaze was cool, detached, the way one looks at a delivery person who has arrived at an inconvenient time. "I told you not to come," Sylvia said. Her voice was calm, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. I specifically sent a text message. "Lorelei, can you not read simple instructions?" "Where is it?" I didn't recognize my own voice. It was a growl. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. Feigning ignorance, she walked past us, stepping onto the white shag carpet without a care, and placed her wineglass on the new marble bar coaster. "Where is what?" "And stop shouting. You are upsetting the atmosphere. We just got the feng shui right." "The cello," Ilara squeaked. Stepping out from behind me, she looked tiny next to her grandmother. "Grandma, where is my cello?" Sylvia turned slowly to face her granddaughter. There was no softness in her expression, no grandmotherly affection. She looked at Ilara's tear-streaked face with a mild distaste, as if the tears were a stain on her new upholstery. "Oh, that?" Sylvia said, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "The old wooden thing. It was taking up too much space. Ilara, look at this room now. Isn't it magnificent? Your Uncle Preston says this is the best sound system on the market. We can finally host the Super Bowl party this year." "I don't care about the sound system," I shouted, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "Where is the instrument? Mother, it is not yours. It belongs to Ilara. Where did you put it?" Sylvia sighed, a long, suffering exhalation that smelled of expensive Chardonnay. She leaned back against the bar, crossing her arms. "Lorelei, really, you are being so dramatic. It is just a dusty old box. We cleared it out. We cleared everything out. Cleared it out to where—" I took a step toward her. The space between us felt charged, dangerous. "To wherever things go, when they are no longer needed," she said, her lips curling into a faint, chilling smile. "We are modernizing. Lorelei, we are looking to the future. You should try it sometime, instead of clinging to the past." She looked over Ilara's head at the massive black screen on the wall. "Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that cut through the room like a knife, "Preston needed the space, and really, darling, nobody listens to cello music anymore. It is so depressing." I looked at Ilara. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the blank television screen, her face drained of all color, looking like she had just watched her own soul get evicted. The cruelty of the space was absolute. There was no art here. There was no history. There was only the cold, hard shine of new plastic and the terrifying void where an $87,000 legacy used to be. And standing in the middle of it was my mother, sipping her wine, thinking she had done us a favor. "Decluttering," I repeated the word, tasting the bile that rose in the back of my throat. It felt like a foreign object in my mouth, sharp and indigestible. "You call a historic instrument decluttering, Mom. That cello is not a stack of old magazines. It is a Matteo Goffriller. It is irreplaceable." Sylvia swirled her wine. watching the golden liquid coat the sides of the glass with a mesmerizing slowness. She looked bored. That was her weapon of choice, boredom. Whenever I became emotional, she became statuesque, making me feel like a hysterical child throwing a tantrum in a library. "Lorelei, please," she said, taking a sip. "You always exaggerate the importance of things. It was just gathering dust. I told your father. Richard, this room smells like a grandmother's attic. We need to breathe. And really, look at this space now. It breathes." "I do not care about the room." My voice cracked, bouncing off the hard, acoustic-killing surfaces of the new walls. "I want to know where the cello is right now. Is it in the garage? Is it in storage? Tell me." Before she could answer, the heavy double doors swung open behind me. My father, Richard, strode in. He was wearing his weekend uniform, a pastel polo shirt tucked into beige chinos, a look that screamed leisure but covered a body tense with constant financial anxiety. He looked from me to Sylvia, his jaw setting in that familiar, stubborn line. "What is with the screaming, Lorelei?" he asked, his voice booming. "We can hear you all the way from the patio. The neighbors will think we are murdering someone." "You might as well have," I said, turning on him. "Where is Alara's cello?" "Dad, Mom says you cleared it out." "What does that mean?" Richard scoffed, walking past me to the bar. He poured himself a scotch. Neat, his movements jerky and agitated. "It means we optimized the living space. That room was dead weight. Square footage in Greenwich is at a premium. Lorelei, you do not let 500 square feet sit idle for a 12-year-old to make noise in twice a week. It is bad asset management." Asset management. I felt like I was speaking a different language. "We are talking about her education, her passion. Her audition is in 2 days." "Oh, stop the melodrama," Richard snapped, slamming the crystal stopper back onto the decanter. "She can play something else. Get her one of those electric ones. They are smaller. They have headphones so nobody else has to listen to it, and they are plastic. They do not rot." That wood was rotting. "Lorelei, I did you a favor. It was a fire hazard." "It was not rotting," I shouted. "It was 300 years old. It was supposed to be kept at 45% humidity." "See?" Richard pointed a finger at me, triumph in his eyes. "High maintenance. Just like you, always making things difficult. We wanted a room where the family could actually gather, where we could watch the game, where Preston could entertain. You are so selfish. Lorelei, you only think about what you want." I stood there, stunned by the sheer velocity of the projection. I was selfish, who drove 2 hours round trip 3 times a week so my daughter could practice in their house, who never asked them for a dime. Alara was still standing by the wall, her hand pressing against the fresh paint as if trying to feel the ghost of the music that used to live there. She looked small, shrunken by the enormity of their indifference. "You have not told me where it is," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am not leaving until you tell me exactly where it is." "Oh, look who is here," Sylvia suddenly chirped, her face brightening with a genuine smile that she never wasted on me. I turned to see my brother, Preston, sauntering into the room. He was followed closely by his wife, Crystal. Preston was 36, but dressed like a 20-year-old influencer, wearing a t-shirt with a cryptic crypto logo and ripped jeans that cost more than my car insurance. Crystal was a blur of blonde extensions and oversized sunglasses, clutching a tiny dog that looked more like a fashion accessory than a mammal. "Whoa," Preston said, stopping in the center of the room and looking around. "Okay, now this is sick. Dad, you actually did it. The surround sound setup is insane." "Only the best. Son," Richard beamed, his chest puffing out. "Wait until you see the resolution on the screen. 8K. "Finally," Crystal giggled, looking around with wide, vacuous eyes. "That old room was so creepy. It looked like a morgue for instruments. Seriously, it gave me bad vibes. This is so much classier." "Right," Preston agreed, high-fiving our father. "Total upgrade. We can actually host the launch party here next week. The investors are going to lose their minds. Preston, I said, cutting through their self-congratulatory bubble. He turned to me, blinking as if he had just noticed I was there. Oh, hey, Lore. Didn't see you. What's up? You look intense. Where is the cello? I asked. Preston laughed, a short, nervous bark. He looked at our parents, then back at me. The cello. You mean the firewood? Relax. Lore, we handled it. Handled it? Look, Preston said, stepping forward and putting a hand on my shoulder. I shrugged it off violently. He held his hands up in mock surrender. Okay, touchy. Listen, here is the deal. I have this opportunity. It is massive, groundbreaking. We are talking about a decentralized finance platform that integrates with virtual reality. It is the future. Lorelei. But liquid capital is tight right now. The market is volatile. So, I stared at him. So, I needed a bridge loan. Just a small injection to secure the initial coin offering. Mom and Dad wanted to help, but their assets are tied up in real estate and the portfolio. Preston needed the money quickly, Sylvia interjected, her voice smooth and reasonable. And we had this object just sitting there, doing nothing. Depreciation in action. My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. You sold it. We liquidated an underperforming asset, Richard corrected, taking a large gulp of his scotch. You sold Alara's cello, I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and animalistic. It wasn't yours to sell. It was in my house, Sylvia snapped, her mask of calm finally cracking to reveal the jagged steel beneath. It was taking up my space, drinking my electricity for the humidifier, collecting my dust. If it is in my house, Lorelei, it is my property, and if I decide it is trash, then it is trash. I can do whatever I want with it. It belongs to the trust, I argued, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Grandma left it to Alara. Grandma is senile and in France, Preston said, rolling his eyes. And possession is 9/10 of the law. Besides, who is going to know it is done? I looked at Alara. She was not moving. She was not breathing. She was staring at her uncle as if he had just pulled a knife and gutted her. Who? I whispered. Who did you sell it to? Does it matter? Richard shrugged. Some private collector, a guy from New York. He didn't ask questions. He just wanted the wood. Came with a van this morning, paid in a cashier's check, and left. Clean deal. How much? I demanded. That is none of your business. Sylvia sniffed. How much? I advanced on them. You sold a Matteo Goffreler. It was appraised at $87,000 last year. How much did you get? Preston looked at his shoes. Richard looked at his scotch. We got a fair price, Richard mumbled. We needed cash fast. Lorelei, Preston said, his voice taking on a defensive whine. These investors don't wait. We had to move. So, yeah, maybe we took a little below market value to facilitate a quick close. How much? I enunciated every word. 87,000, Richard said defiantly. We got exactly what the appraisal said. No negotiation. He wrote the check. We gave him the box. You sold it for 87,000, I repeated, my mind reeling. That was the insurance value. The market value is higher, but that is not the point. You stole it. We did not steal it, Sylvia shrieked. We repurposed it. And look, she gestured wildly around the room. We put the money back into the house. This renovation, the screen, the sound system, it cost exactly 87,000. We invested in the property. We increased the value of the estate. It benefits everyone. The horror of her logic hit me like a physical blow. They had not just sold the cello, they had transmuted it. They had taken the physical embodiment of my daughter's talent, her future, her soul, and they had turned it into a 100-inch television screen and a wet bar for my brother's friends to lean against while they drank cheap beer and talked about crypto scams. They had traded a piece of history for a man cave. You used the money for this. I gestured to the room, for Preston to have a party room. It is a networking hub, Preston corrected, looking offended. You don't understand business. Lorelei, you have to spend money to make money. This room is going to generate millions when my coin takes off. I will buy the kid 10 cellos. I will buy her an orchestra. Who cares? I care. I turned to see Alara. She had collapsed onto the floor. She wasn't sobbing loudly. She was curled into a ball on the white shag carpet, her hands covering her ears, rocking back and forth. She was making a sound I had never heard before, a low, keening whimper, like a wounded animal trying to stay quiet so the predator doesn't come back. Alara, I choked out, rushing to her side. I fell to my knees, wrapping my arms around her. She was shivering violently. Stop it, Sylvia said, looking down at us with disgust. Get her up, Lorelei. She is wrinkling the carpet. It is brand new. You are monsters, I hissed, looking up at them. You are absolute monsters. We are practical, Richard said, finishing his drink. And frankly, I am tired of this guilt trip. We did what was best for the family. Preston has a future. That noise-making box was a hobby. You need to get your priorities straight. The buyer, I said, clutching Alara tighter. What is his name? I need to contact him. We can buy it back. I don't know, Richard said, turning toward the television and picking up the remote. He didn't give a name, just an agent, anonymous, gone, and the money is already spent. Lorelei, the contractors have been paid. Preston has his seed capital. It is over. It is not over, I said, but my voice felt small against the wall of their united delusion. It is, Sylvia said, turning off the lights in the main hallway so the blue LEDs behind the bar popped. Now, are you staying for dinner? We are ordering sushi to celebrate the new room. If not, please leave. You are bringing the vibe down. I looked at my brother. The thief. I looked at my parents. The fences. They stood there, bathed in the artificial glow of their new toy, utterly convinced of their own righteousness. They had sold their granddaughter's future for a quick cash infusion and a status symbol, and they slept soundly at night. Come on, Alara, I whispered, lifting my daughter up. She was heavy with grief, her legs barely working. We are leaving. Don't slam the door on your way out, my father called after us as he turned on the giant screen. The opening theme of a football game blasted through the speakers, loud, aggressive, and hollow, the exact sound of this house. I stood on the front porch of the house I grew up in, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely tap the green call button on my phone. The air was thick with the impending storm, a low-pressure system that pressed against my temples. I dialed 911. It was the nuclear option. In the unwritten constitution of the Bracken family, you do not involve outsiders, and you certainly do not involve the law. But as I looked through the window at my father laughing at something on the television screen that had replaced my daughter's soul, the Constitution burned to ash in my mind. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I would like to report a theft, I said, my voice sounding brittle and strange. My parents have stolen a musical instrument worth $87,000 from my daughter. When the patrol car rolled up 10 minutes later, painting the manicured hedges with alternating strokes of red and blue light, the neighborhood curtains twitched. I knew the neighbors were watching. In Greenwich, a police cruiser in a driveway is more scandalous than an affair. 2 officers stepped out. One was older, with a mustache that looked like a push broom. The other was young, probably Preston's age, looking bored before he even reached the steps. My father opened the door before they could ring the bell. He had composed himself. The flushed, Scotch-fueled arrogance was gone, replaced by the weary, bewildered demeanor of a respectable grandfather dealing with a hysterical child. Officers, Richard said, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind him, physically blocking us from re-entering the scene of the crime. I apologize for the disturbance. My daughter is having a bit of an episode. He stole my daughter's cello, I cut in. Stepping forward, I pointed a shaking finger at him. He and my mother sold it this morning to a private buyer. It is a Matteo Goffreler. It belongs to a trust. It is grand larceny, the older officer, whose name tag read Miller, looked from me to Richard. He saw a woman with wild hair and a tear-stained face, and he saw a man in expensive chinos standing in front of a $3 million home. I saw the bias settle into his eyes like sediment in a pond. "Is this true?" Sir Miller asked, taking out a small notepad. "Did you sell the instrument?" "Officers, look," Richard said, dropping his voice to a confidential, reasonable baritone. "It is a family matter. The instrument in question was in my house. It has been in my house for years. It was a gift from my mother. We decided to clear out some old clutter to renovate the room. Lorelei here is just emotional. She gets very attached to things. It is not his—" I screamed, and the sound of my own desperation made me cringe. I sounded crazy. I knew I sounded crazy. "It belongs to the Alara Bracken Education Trust. My grandmother left it to my daughter, not to him." Officer Miller looked at me. "Ma'am, do you have documentation proving ownership, a title, a receipt, trust papers?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, I do." "Can I see them?" "They are in my safety deposit box at the bank," I said, realizing with a sinking heart what day it was. "The bank is closed until Monday morning, but I can describe it. I can show you the insurance appraisal on my phone." I fumbled for my phone, trying to bring up the PDF of the appraisal I had scanned 2 years ago. My fingers were clumsy. "It does not matter what the appraisal says," Richard interrupted smoothly. "The issue is ownership. My mother gave that cello to the family. I am the head of the family. It was in my possession. I exercised my right to sell personal property." Officer Miller sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had 10 other calls to answer and did not want to referee a rich family's squabble over furniture. He capped his pen. "Ma'am," Miller said, turning to me, "if the item was in his house, and there is a dispute over who actually owns it, and you cannot produce paperwork right here and now proving it was stolen, this is not a criminal matter." "What?" I stared at him. He admitted he sold it. He admitted it. "It is a civil dispute," the officer said, reciting the phrase that protects more domestic abusers and thieves than any other sequence of words in the English language. "You will have to take this up in civil court. We cannot arrest a man for selling property out of his own home based on your word alone." "But by Monday the money will be gone," I pleaded. "They spent it on a home theater. You have to stop them." "We cannot stop them, ma'am. We are not judges. This is a civil matter. Contact your lawyer on Monday." Miller turned to Richard. "Sir, try to keep the noise down." "Of course, officer," Richard said, offering a hand which Miller shook. "Again, so sorry for the trouble." The police got back in their car. The lights died. The darkness rushed back in, heavier than before. I stood there, paralyzed by the absolute indifference of the universe. The law was supposed to be a shield. Instead, it was just a bureaucratic shrug. Richard looked at me. The grandfatherly mask dropped, revealing the sneer beneath. "Get off my property, Lorelei, and take your brat with you. If you come back without an invitation, I will call them back, and this time, I will press charges for trespassing." The door opened, and Preston leaned out. He was holding a beer now, leaning against the frame with the casual ease of a man who has never faced a consequence in his life. He looked at me, then at Alara, who was standing by the car, looking small and broken in the driveway lights. "Don't be so selfish, sis," Preston called out. His voice was light, mocking. "I told you, it is an investment. Once the platform launches in Q3, I will pay you back double. Serious. You will thank me later." "You are a thief, Preston," I said. "You are a parasite. And you are trespassing," he grinned. "Bye, Lorelei." The door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The drive back to my apartment was silent. Alara sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the rain that had started to streak the glass. She did not speak. She did not cry. She looked like she was in shock. Her body present, but her spirit still standing in that media room, searching for the ghost of her instrument. When we got home, The apartment felt small and shabby. The radiator clanked. The smell of our neighbor's cooking burnt garlic and onions seeped through the vents. It was a stark contrast to the scent of fresh paint and money we had just left. "Elara," I said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Honey, I am going to fix this. I promise." She pulled away from my touch. It wasn't an angry gesture. It was the recoil of someone who had been burned and could no longer trust the world not to hurt her. She walked to the corner of the living room where her practice stand was set up. There, leaning against the wall in its soft canvas case, was her student cello. It was a plywood instrument we had bought for $500 when she first started playing at age 6. It was durable, heavy, and lacked any tonal complexity. She hadn't played it in 3 years. She unzipped the case. She took out the bow. She sat down on her stool. I watched, holding my breath. She placed the bow on the string and pulled. The sound that came out was flat, boxy, and harsh. It lacked the shimmering resonance of the gauffriller. It lacked the soul. Elara played 3 notes. Then she stopped. She lowered the bow. Her hands were shaking. "It sounds dead," she whispered. "It sounds like it is choking." "It is just different," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "You can still practice your fingerings. You can still—" "No," she said. She stood up and put the cello back in the case. She zipped it up with a finality that terrified me. "I can't play this. It hurts my ears. It sounds like a lie." She went into her bedroom and closed the door. I stood in the living room, listening to the silence. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. It was the sound of a gift being strangled. Monday morning came, bringing with it a gray, relentless drizzle. I called in sick to Vanguard Logistics. I could not look at spreadsheets today. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers, and called the family lawyer, a man named Henderson who had handled my grandfather's estate decades ago. I explained everything: the trust, the theft, the police report, the admission of guilt. Henderson listened, his breathing heavy on the other end of the line. "Lorelei," he said finally, his voice gravelly, "I will be honest with you. This is a mess." "But it is clear-cut," I argued. "The trust owns the instrument." "Does the trust have a specific inventory list that details the serial number of that specific cello?" "Yes, it is in the appendix." "Good. That helps. But here's the problem. Your father will claim he had verbal permission from your mother, the trustee, to sell it. Or he will claim it was a gift. Or he will claim the trust was dissolved. He will throw up 1,000 roadblocks." "So we sue him," I said. "We can," Henderson said. "But civil litigation in Connecticut over family assets, it is a meat grinder. It will take 18 months, minimum, just to get to discovery. Then there are depositions, motions. Your father has resources. He will delay. He will bleed you dry." "How much?" I asked, "to take this to trial?" "You are looking at 50, maybe $60,000 in legal fees, and that is if we win. If we lose, you are out the money and the cello. So I have to spend $60,000 to get back $87,000. And that is assuming the cello is still retrievable," Henderson added. "If the buyer moves it out of state, or if it is sold again, good luck. The chain of custody breaks. We are chasing a ghost." I hung up the phone. I felt a physical weight pressing down on my chest, compressing my lungs. The system was designed for people like Richard and Preston. It was designed for people who could afford to wait, who could afford to lie, who could afford to pay lawyers to argue that black was white. It was not designed for a single mother and a 12-year-old girl. I opened my laptop, looking for a distraction, looking for anything to keep me from screaming. I logged onto Facebook. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, put it right at the top of my feed. A photo posted 10 minutes ago by Sylvia Bracken. It was a wide-angle shot of the new media room. The lighting was perfect. The 100-inch screen was displaying a vibrant tropical landscape. The black leather sofas gleamed. On the bar, a bottle of Dom Perignon sat in a silver bucket. Preston was in the photo, sitting on the sofa, holding a glass of champagne, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Richard was standing next to him, looking proud. Sylvia was in the foreground, smiling that tight, practiced smile. The caption read, "So blessed to enjoy our golden years with family. Thank you, Preston, for helping us modernize our home, a space for new memories. Family." First blessed home sweet, home. There was no mention of what had been sacrificed to build this altar to mediocrity. There was no mention of Alara. She had been erased, her heritage liquidated to buy pixels and leather. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. The anger that had been burning hot all weekend suddenly cooled. It crystallized into something hard, sharp, and dangerous. I realized then that Henderson was right. I could not win this in a civil court. I could not win this by playing by the rules of a society that worshipped men like my father and tolerated parasites like my brother. They had used power, the power of ownership, the power of money, the power of parental authority to crush us. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to save my daughter from the silence that was consuming her, I needed a power that superseded theirs. I needed a power that did not care about civil disputes or jurisdiction. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the closet where I kept my old travel documents. I dug through a shoebox of photographs until I found it. A faded photograph of a woman standing in front of a stone chateau in the south of France. She was holding a cello bow like a scepter. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unforgiving. My grandmother, Constance Bracken. She was the only person my father had ever feared. He thought she was too old, too far away, and too detached to care. He thought he was safe because he was the king of his little castle in Connecticut. He forgot who built the castle. I picked up my phone. I did not look at the time difference. I did not care if it was 3 a.m. in Provence. I dialed the international number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a click. "Hello?" The voice was raspy, aged, but it had the tensile strength of steel wire. "Grandma," I said, "it is Lorelei. They sold it. They sold the Goffriller." The phone in my hand felt heavy, not with the weight of its components, but with the gravitational pull of the decision I was about to make. Calling Constance Bracken was not like calling a grandmother. It was like summoning a natural disaster. My grandmother did not bake cookies. She did not knit. She dismantled corporations and, occasionally, people. At 85 years old, she had exiled herself to the south of France, living in a restored chateau in Provence, ostensibly to enjoy the lavender and the wine, but I suspected it was actually because the Atlantic Ocean was the only barrier thick enough to keep her from strangling her son. My father. I stared at the number stored in my contacts. I had not called it in 2 years, not since Christmas of 2023, when she had listened to my father brag about a new car for 10 minutes before simply saying, "Richard, you are a bore," and hanging up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contrasted with the dead silence of my apartment. Alara was in her room, the door shut, likely staring at the ceiling. I was alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound accompanying my dread. I knew that by pressing the call button, I was initiating a sequence of events I would not be able to stop. I was inviting a shark into the swimming pool. But then I thought of the media room. I thought of the empty space where the cello used to be. I thought of Sylvia's dismissive wave and Richard's smug assertion that he had optimized the family assets. I pressed the button. The ringback tone was different, a long double tone that signaled the call was crossing the ocean. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. I almost hung up. She was probably napping. She was probably drinking cognac in the garden. She was probably... "Hello." The voice was unmistakable. It was dry, raspy, and carried an inherent authority that made me want to straighten my spine even though I was sitting alone in my pajamas. It was a voice that sounded like expensive parchment paper being crumpled. "Grandma," I said, my voice shaking. "It is Lorelei." There was a pause on the line, a beat of silence where I could almost hear the cicadas of the French countryside in the background. "Lorelei," she said. Her tone was not warm, but it was not hostile. It was merely observant. You are calling me on a Monday. It is 9 in the morning there. You should be counting shipping containers. I am at home, I said. I took a personal day. A personal day, she repeated, tasting the words with skepticism. You are not the type for personal days. You work like a mule. It is your best quality. Why are you at home? I took a deep breath. I needed to say it. I needed to make it real. They sold it. Grandma, Richard and Sylvia, they sold the cello. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for 5 seconds, then 10. It was a terrifying void. I worried the call had dropped. I worried she had had a stroke. Then, she spoke. Her voice had dropped an octave. It was no longer dry. It was cold. Liquid nitrogen cold. Explain, she commanded. One word, no pleasantries. I poured it all out. I told her about the text message telling us not to come. I told her about the truck. I told her about the media room, the wet bar, the 100-inch screen. I told her about the decluttering. I told her about the anonymous buyer and the check for $87,000. I told her about the police and their indifference. I told her about Alara lying on the floor, making sounds like a dying animal. I spoke until my throat was raw. Tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the formica table. When I finished, there was another silence, but this time, I could hear her breathing. It was slow, rhythmic, controlled, the breathing of a sniper settling into position. He sold the Goffriller, she said finally. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, verifying the data. For $87,000 to a stranger. Yes, I sobbed. He said it was his. He said because it was in his house, it was his property. The police said it is a civil matter because I do not have the papers. The police are idiots, she said dismissively. But Richard is something worse. He is a thief. I don't know what to do, I confessed. The lawyer here said it would take years to sue him. He said the money would be gone by then. Grandma, Alara is broken. That cello was her life. Lorelei, stop crying, Constance snapped. Tears are for funerals. This is not a funeral. This is a reckoning. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, sniffing. What can we do? He sold it. Did he give you a copy of the bill of sale? She asked sharply. No, he said it was a private deal. Cashier's check. He wouldn't give me the name. Did he sign anything? Did he give the buyer a receipt? I assume so. He is obsessed with paperwork when it benefits him. Good, Constance said. That is good. He has created a paper trail of his own stupidity. I don't understand, I said. How does that help us? He claims you gave it to him. I gave him nothing, Constance said, her voice rising slightly, vibrating with a terrifying intensity. I let him live in that house. I let him drive cars I paid for. But the Goffriller, no. Richard has the musical appreciation of a concrete block. I would never give him a Matteo Goffriller. She paused. And I heard the clink of glass against glass. She was pouring a drink. Lorelei, listen to me very carefully, she said. When Alara was born, I did not trust your father to manage her future. I saw how he was with Preston spoiling him, rotting his brain with easy money. I knew he would do the same or worse to Alara, or simply neglect her, so I set up the Alara Bracken Education Trust. I know, I said, but Richard says— Quiet, she cut me off. You know the name of the trust. You do not know the assets. The cello is not personal property. Lorelei, it is the primary asset of the Education Trust. It is listed on the Schedule of Assets filed with the IRS in 2014. It is titled to the trust entity, not to me, and certainly not to Richard. My hand tightened on the phone. So he didn't just sell my cello. He liquidated a trust asset without the consent of the trustee, Constance said. I am the sole trustee. You are the beneficiary guardian. Richard is a third party with no legal standing. In the eyes of the federal government, he did not just have a family dispute. He committed trust embezzlement. He committed wire fraud if he deposited that check. And since the value is over $5,000 and the goods likely cross state lines unless this mysterious buyer lives in the shed, it is a federal offense. I felt the air in the kitchen shift. The gray light coming through the window seemed to sharpen. "Federal offense," I whispered. "He did not sell a lamp." "Lorelei," Constance said, her voice dropping to a murmur that was far more frightening than a scream. "He fenced stolen goods. He sold property that did not belong to him to pay for a television. He has exposed himself to criminal liability that goes far beyond a civil lawsuit. He doesn't know," I realized. "He thinks it was just Grandma's old cello. He thinks he is the king of the world because he lives in a castle I let him borrow," Constance corrected. "He has forgotten that he is a tenant." "What do I do?" I asked, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. "Do I go back to the police? Do I tell them about the trust?" "No," Constance said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because if you warn him, he will try to fix it," she said. "He will try to buy it back. He will try to bribe the buyer. He will destroy the paperwork. He will claim it was a misunderstanding. He is a weasel. Lorelei, if you corner a weasel, it digs a hole. We do not want him to dig a hole. We want him to walk into a trap. So I do nothing." "You do exactly what he expects you to do," Constance instructed. "You are the defeated daughter. You are the emotional, irrational, powerless single mother. You cry. You stay home. You do not call him. You do not text him. You let him believe he has won. Let him enjoy his new media room. Let him sit on his leather sofa and drink his champagne." "But Alara—" "Tell Alara nothing yet," Constance said. "She is not a good actor. Her grief must be real for now. It will make the victory sweeter, but you must be ice. Can you be ice?" "Lorelei." "I can," I said. And for the first time in years, I felt like I truly was her granddaughter. I felt the cold anger that ran in our bloodline, the steel that my father had somehow missed. "Good," she said. "I am calling Arthur Sterling." I gasped. Arthur Sterling was not just a lawyer, he was a legend. He was the managing partner of Sterling, Holt Vance in Manhattan. He charged $1,200 an hour and specialized in destroying corporate executives. "Mr. Sterling," I asked. "For a family dispute." "It is not a dispute anymore," Constance said. "It is an eviction and a prosecution. Arthur has been handling my estate planning for 40 years. He knows where every skeleton in Richard's closet is buried because he helped dig half the graves. I will have him initiate the asset recovery protocols immediately. We will find the buyer. We will get the instrument back. That is the easy part." "And the hard part?" "The hard part," Constance said, and I could hear a smile in her voice, a terrible, predatory smile. "We'll be watching Richard realize that he has not only lost his son's inheritance but his own roof." "His roof." "You will see," she said. "Now, hang up. Do not contact me again until I tell you. Do not answer Richard's calls. If Preston texts you to gloat, ignore him. Silence is your weapon now. Let them feel safe. Let them plan a party. I want them fat and happy when the hammer falls." "Yes, Grandma," I said. "And Lorelei?" "Yes." "I am sorry I did not visit more," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, a microscopic crack in the armor. "I thought leaving him alone would minimize the damage. I see now that weeds grow faster when you do not tend the garden. I am coming to pull the weeds." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The silence in the kitchen was no longer empty. It was charged with kinetic energy. It was the silence of a fuse burning down toward a pile of dynamite. I stood up and walked to the sink. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the reflection of the window. My eyes were red. My hair was a mess. But there was something different in my expression. The panic was gone. The helplessness was gone. I walked to the living room. Alara's door was still closed. I wanted to run in there and tell her. I wanted to tell her that the cavalry was coming, that the Queen of France had declared war on Connecticut, but I couldn't. Constance was right. We needed the element of surprise. I picked up my phone again. There was a text from Preston, sent 10 minutes ago. Preston, hey, seriously, stop being dramatic. The room is awesome. You should come to the launch party in 2 weeks. Bring the kid. We'll order pizza. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type 1,000 things. I wanted to tell him he was a felon. I wanted to tell him his crypto project was going to die in a federal indictment. I took a breath. I deleted the angry words I had started to type. I typed nothing. I put the phone face down on the table. I went to the kitchen and started making lunch. I moved mechanically, slicing bread, spreading mustard, washing lettuce. But in my head, I was not making sandwiches. I was counting down. For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost. My mother called twice on Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. Lorelei, pick up. We are trying to be the bigger people here. Don't be childish. My father sent an email on Wednesday. Subject moving forward. Lorelei, I expect you to be at the family dinner on Sunday. We need to present a united front for Preston's investors. Do not embarrass us. I deleted it. I went to work. I audited spreadsheets. I sat in meetings and nodded at the appropriate times. I came home. I cooked dinner. I listened to Alara practice on the terrible plywood cello, wincing every time the A string screeched, but I said nothing. I held her when she cried at night because she missed the deep, soulful resonance of the Goffriller. It feels like part of me is missing, she told me on Thursday night. I know. I smoothed her hair. Just hold on. Just a little longer. Why? She asked, looking up at me with dull eyes. What is going to happen? Justice, I whispered, kissing her forehead. By the second week, my silence had begun to unnerve them. I could tell by the escalating tone of their messages. They were used to me fighting, begging, and then eventually surrendering. They were not used to me simply vanishing. Preston texted, Are you seriously ghosting us? Mom is freaking out. She says you are being ungrateful. Sylvia left a voicemail that was almost manic, Lorelei. This is ridiculous. We are hosting the big reveal party on Saturday. The neighbors are coming. The mayor might come. You have to be there. People will ask where you are. I smiled as I listened to it. They were scared, not of the law, but of appearances. They needed the prop of the happy family to sell their lie. On Friday afternoon, the day before the party, I finally broke my silence. I sent a single text message to my mother. We will come. Alara and I will be there. The reply was instantaneous. Good. Wear something nice. Not that gray suit you always wear. And tell Alara to smile. We want this to be a happy occasion. I stared at the screen. A happy occasion. Yes, it would be. Just not for them. I looked out the window at the gray Connecticut sky. Somewhere over the Atlantic, or perhaps already in a high-rise in Manhattan. Arthur Sterling was moving pieces on a chessboard that my father didn't even know existed. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Tomorrow, we would go to the party. We would walk into the lion's den, and we would watch the roof collapse. The invitation arrived by courier on a Tuesday, encased in an envelope so thick it felt like it was plated in armor. It was cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering that swirled aggressively across the page, announcing the grand unveiling of the Bracken Family Entertainment Wing and Venture Capital launch. It was the kind of invitation usually reserved for royal weddings or state dinners, not for showing off a renovated room in a suburban house. At the bottom, handwritten in my mother's jagged, angular script, was a note Lorelei. Please arrive by 5. We want a family photo before the investors arrive. Do not wear black. This is a celebration. And tell Alara to leave the sulking at home. We are moving forward. I held the card in my hand, feeling the weight of its hypocrisy. They were celebrating the consumption of my daughter's future. They were popping corks over a grave. Mom, Alara asked, looking up from her homework. She had been quieter these last 2 weeks, a ghostly version of herself. Do we have to go? Yes, I said, placing the invitation on the counter. We are going, but I don't want to see them, she whispered. I don't want to see the room. I walked over to her and knelt down, taking her hands. They were cold. Listen to me, Elara. Tonight is not a party. Tonight is a performance. We are going to go there. We are going to smile, and we are going to watch them. Think of it like a play. They are the actors, and they think they are the heroes. But we know the ending of the play, and they do not. What is the ending? She asked. You will see, I said. Go put on your blue velvet dress, the one Grandma Constance sent you for your birthday last year. When we pulled into the driveway at 5 o'clock sharp, the transformation of the house was complete. The landscaping had been manicured to within an inch of its life. The front pillars were wrapped in white fairy lights. Even though it was barely November, parked in the driveway were 3 luxury SUVs that I knew belonged to my parents' friends, people who judged their self-worth by the size of their grills. We walked up the steps. I adjusted Elara's collar. Shoulders back, I whispered. You are a musician. You have more dignity in your little finger than they have in this entire zip code. The door opened before we could knock. It was Crystal, Preston's wife. She was wearing a sequined cocktail dress that caught the light like a disco ball. She held a glass of pink champagne in one hand and her terrified-looking dog in the other. You guys made it, she squealed, air kissing me near the ear so she wouldn't smudge her makeup. Oh my God, Lorelei, you look so sensible. And Elara, cute dress, a little retro, but cute. Hello, Crystal, I said, stepping into the foyer. The house smelled of expensive lilies and truffle oil. It was the scent of aggressive wealth. The foyer was already buzzing with early arrivals neighbors, a few of my father's golf buddies, and a cluster of young men in ill-fitting suits who I assumed were Preston's business partners. Sylvia spotted us from the living room and glided over. She was wearing a floor-length gown in champagne silk. She looked triumphant. She looked like a woman who had successfully scrubbed a stain out of a rug. You are here, she said, looking me up and down. And you wore navy. Well, it is better than black, I suppose. Elara, darling, give Grandma a hug. Elara stood stiff as a board while Sylvia embraced her. It was like watching a snake coil around a marble statue. Now, Sylvia said, releasing her and clapping her hands. Come see it. You have to see it with the mood lighting on. She ushered us toward the media room. The double doors were propped open. The room was packed. The air inside was 10 degrees warmer than the rest of the house, thick with body heat and the hum of electronics. The transformation was indeed total. The room was a shrine to sensory overload. The walls were dark charcoal. The lighting was recessed and purple, giving the space the vibe of a nightclub in a bad spy movie. The massive 100-inch screen was playing a loop of abstract, high-definition geometric shapes that swirled and exploded in time with the thumping bass of the ambient house music. And there, standing in front of the screen like a prophet of the digital age, was Preston. He held a microphone. He was sweating slightly, his face flushed with adrenaline and alcohol. He was preaching to a circle of my uncles and a few skeptical-looking neighbors. The beauty of the Omnicoin ecosystem, Preston was saying, his voice amplified by the speakers that had been bought with Matteo Goffriller's blood, is that it is completely decentralized. We are cutting out the middlemen, no banks, no fees, just pure peer-to-peer value transfer. And because you are getting in on the ground floor, at the friends and family tier, we are projecting an initial yield of 200% by the third quarter. 200%? Asked Uncle Jerry. A retired dentist who had lost money on every scheme Preston had ever pitched, but kept coming back because he liked the free scotch. That sounds risky. Preston. High risk, high reward. Jerry? Preston laughed, pointing a finger gun at him. But look around you. Does this look like a risk? We are capitalizing the project with solid assets. Dad believes in it. Mom believes in it. We have already secured the initial liquidity pool. I felt Elara's hand tighten in mine. The initial liquidity pool. That was her cello. He was calling her heritage a liquidity pool. It is amazing, isn't it? I turned to see my father, Richard, standing beside us. He was holding a tumblers of scotch, swirling it with a rhythmic clinking sound. He was beaming. He looked at the screen, then at the gathered crowd, then at the bar where a hired bartender was mixing cocktails. "Quite a setup, Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat. "State of the art," Richard declared, puffing out his chest. "Dolby Atmos surround sound. You can hear a pin drop in a movie. It vibrates right through the floorboards. Cost a fortune, but quality always does." "It certainly does," I said. A woman I didn't recognize, perhaps a wife of one of the investors, drifted over. She was holding a plate of canapes. She looked at the room, then at Richard. "It is a lovely space, Richard," she said. "But didn't this used to be the music room I seem to remember coming here for a Christmas party years ago? There was a beautiful piano, and didn't your granddaughter play the cello?" Elara froze. I felt her breath catch. Richard laughed, a loud booming sound that was meant to be jovial, but sounded aggressive. He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, ancient history. Barbara," he chuckled. "Yes, we had a lot of old clutter in here, dusty instruments, stacks of paper. It was practically a fire hazard. We decided it was time to join the 21st century. The piano was out of tune, and the cello, well, let's just say we found a better use for it." "Oh," Barbara asked politely. "Did she stop playing?" "You know how kids are," Richard said, winking at Elara, a gesture so cruel I almost lunged at him. "They lose interest. It was just gathering dust, a piece of wood taking up space. So we cleared it out, sold it off, got rid of it to let the house breathe. And honestly, looking at this screen, I think we made the right trade. Don't you?" "It is certainly impressive," Barbara said, sensing the tension and drifting away. Elara was shaking. Her face was turning a shade of red I had never seen before. She looked at her grandfather, and for a moment, I thought she was going to scream. She opened her mouth, her eyes blazing with the fury of the betrayed. I squeezed her hand, hard. "Silence," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "Remember what Grandma Constance said. Let them dig." Elara looked at me, then at Richard. She closed her mouth. She took a deep breath through her nose. Exhaling slowly, she swallowed the scream. "Go get a soda, honey," I said loudly enough for Richard to hear. "Grandpa is right. We should enjoy the party." Richard clapped me on the shoulder, nearly spilling his drink. "That is the spirit. Lorelei, finally. You are getting with the program. Grab a glass of champagne. It is Veuve Clicquot, top shelf." I watched him walk away, joining Sylvia near the bar. They stood together, the king and queen of their little hill, surveying their subjects. Sylvia was laughing at something Crystal said, throwing her head back, her diamond earrings catching the purple light. Preston tapped the microphone, sending a feedback screech through the room that made everyone wince. All right, everyone," Preston shouted. "Gather round. We are about to make it official." The crowd shuffled toward the center of the room. Sylvia and Richard flanked Preston. Crystal handed them a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors, the kind used for opening strip malls. "We want to thank you all for coming," Preston said, his voice oozing with unearned confidence. "This room represents a new chapter for the Bracken family. It is a symbol of our pivot to the future. Out with the old, in with the new. We are not just launching a token, we are launching a legacy. Here," shouted Uncle Jerry, raising his glass. "To the future," Sylvia toasted, raising her glass. "To prosperity," Richard bellowed. They stood there, framed by the massive screen, bathed in the garish purple light, holding the giant scissors. They looked ridiculous. They looked like villains in a cartoon. So absorbed in their own monologue that they didn't notice the cliff edge they were standing on. Elara had returned to my side. She wasn't holding a soda. She was just standing there, watching them. "They look stupid," she whispered. "They do." I agreed. Preston opened the scissors. A red ribbon had been strung across the front of the wet bar. It was absurd theater. "On the count of 3, Preston yelled. 1, 2. The room held its breath. The champagne bubbles fizzed, the bass throbbed, and then it happened. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite, musical chime of the front doorbell. It was a long, insistent press, followed immediately by a heavy, authoritative pounding on the wood. Bang, bang, bang. The sound cut through the party chatter. Preston froze, the scissors hovering over the ribbon. Sylvia frowned, her glass pausing halfway to her lips. "Who on earth is that?" Sylvia asked, annoyed. "All the guests are here." "Probably the pizza delivery for the kids," Richard said, waving his hand. "Ignore it. Someone get the door." "I will get it," I said. My voice rang out clearly in the sudden silence of the room. I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked out of the media room, my heels clicking on the hardwood of the hallway. I felt a surge of adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. "Lorelei, wait for the toast," Sylvia called after me. I kept walking. I reached the foyer. The pounding came again, louder this time. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. I opened the door to the cool evening air. Standing on the porch was not a pizza delivery boy. It was not a late guest. It was a phalanx. In the center stood a man in a charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated a terrifying calmness. Arthur Sterling. Flanking him were 4 men in dark uniforms with private security embroidered on their tactical vests. And behind them, standing with their hands resting on their belts, were 2 uniformed Connecticut state troopers, their hats pulled low against the drizzle. Arthur Sterling looked at me. He didn't smile, but his eyes held a glimmer of recognition. "Lorelei Bracken," he asked. His voice was like a gavel striking mahogany. "Yes," I said, stepping aside. "We are here for the eviction," he said simply. I opened the door wide. "Please," I said, "come in. They are in the media room. Just follow the sound of the champagne popping." As they stepped past me, boots thudding heavily on the marble floor, I looked back toward the party. I heard Preston's voice, muffled but still arrogant. 3 cut. There was a cheer, the sound of applause, and then the heavy, rhythmic sound of the troopers marching down the hall began to drown it out. The ending of the play had arrived. The hallway leading to the media room was a tunnel of anticipation. I walked in front, a silent guide leading the execution squad to the firing line. Behind me, the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots against the polished oak floorboards created a percussion track that was far more menacing than the house music vibrating through the walls. I could hear the breathing of the state troopers steady, professional, indifferent. They were not here for a social call. They were here to dismantle a life. We reached the double doors. Inside, the party was at its zenith. The red ribbon had been cut and lay on the floor like a severed artery. Preston was holding a magnum of champagne, shaking it, preparing to spray the crowd in a display of Formula One arrogance. My father, Richard, was laughing, his head thrown back, his face flushed with the triumph of a man who believes he has gotten away with everything. Sylvia was clapping, her diamonds catching the strobe lights. I stepped to the side, pressing my back against the doorframe, and gestured for them to enter. Arthur Sterling walked in first. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Sterling did not look like he belonged in this world of purple neon and shag carpets. He was a monolith of charcoal gray wool and icy professionalism. He stood 6'2", his posture impeccable, holding a black leather briefcase as if it contained the nuclear codes. Behind him, the 4 private security contractors fanned out, their movements precise and synchronized, blocking the exits. And behind them, the 2 state troopers stood tall, their wide-brimmed hats casting shadows over their eyes, their hands resting casually near their holsters. The music was still thumping a mindless, repetitive bass beat, but no one was moving. Preston stopped mid-shake, the champagne bottle lowered slowly to his side. The neighbors froze. Mid-cheer, the air in the room curdled. Arthur Sterling did not shout. He did not raise his hands. He simply looked at the young man manning the DJ laptop in the corner. He stared at him with such intense, withering disapproval that the boy scrambled to hit the mute button. The silence that followed was violent. It crashed into the room, ringing in our ears. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fan on the 100-inch television and the nervous whimpering of Crystal's dog. Richard was the first to recover, or rather, he was the first to let his ego override his survival instinct. He stepped forward, his face shifting from jovial to indignant. He set his drink down on the wet bar with a hard clack. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, his voice booming in the sudden quiet. He gestured at the troopers. "Who let you in? This is a private residence. We are in the middle of a celebration." Sterling did not answer immediately. He took 2 steps into the room, his shoes making no sound on the thick white carpet. He looked at Richard, then at the massive screen, then at the bar. His lip curled slightly, a microscopic expression of distaste for the vulgarity of the renovation. "Mr. Richard Bracken?" Sterling asked. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. It was a voice trained in the high courts of Manhattan, designed to dismantle arguments and egos. "I am Richard Bracken," my father spat, stepping closer, puffing out his chest. "And you are trespassing. Get out of my house before I call the police commissioner. I play golf with him." "You can try calling him," one of the state troopers said, his voice flat. "But he is aware we are here, sir." Richard blinked, his confidence faltering for a split second. Sterling adjusted his cufflinks. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the senior partner at Sterling. Holt and Vance. I am here representing my client, Mrs. Constance Bracken." The name landed like a grenade. Sylvia let out a small, strangled gasp. She brought a hand to her throat. Preston looked confused, his brow furrowing as he tried to process why his grandmother's lawyer would crash his crypto launch. "My mother," Richard scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously to the briefcase. "What does she have to do with this? She is in France. She is probably asleep." "Mrs. Bracken is very much awake," Sterling said, "and she is very much aware of the renovations you have undertaken." "So what?" Richard crossed his arms. "I am improving the property. She should be thanking me." "We got rid of the junk." "The junk," Sterling repeated. He opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like a pistol cocking. He pulled out a thick sheaf of documents, bound in blue legal covers. "You are referring, I assume, to the Matteo Goffriller cello, dated 1824. The old fiddle," Richard dismissed. "Yes, we sold it. It was clutter. Look, if this is about money, tell Mom I will send her a check once the crypto project takes off. We just needed some bridge capital." Sterling looked at Preston, then back at Richard. "You seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding of the law. Mr. Bracken, you believe you sold a piece of old furniture found in your attic. You did not." Sterling held up a document. "This is the schedule of assets for the Alara Bracken Education Trust. Established in 2014, the primary asset of this trust is the cello you liquidated this past Monday. The trust is a separate legal entity. It is not you. It is not your wife. It is not your mother. It is a federal legal structure." Sterling took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous, predatory purr. "By removing that instrument from this domicile and selling it for cash, you did not clean your house. You committed theft. You committed embezzlement of trust assets. And because you deposited the proceeds into a joint account to pay these contractors, you committed money laundering." Preston laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound, but it broke the tension. "Dude, seriously, you are way overreacting. It is family stuff. Grandma gave that cello to us. It was in our house. Possession is 9/10 of the law, right?" Sterling turned his head slowly to look at Preston. He looked at him the way a scientist looks at a particularly disappointing bacteria sample. "Preston Bracken," Sterling said, "the entrepreneur, Let me clarify something for you. Possession is 9/10 of the law, only if you are a squatter. In the world of high-value asset trusts, title is everything. You have no title. Your father has no title. You sold property that did not belong to you to fund what is this? He gestured vaguely at the screen. A Ponzi scheme. It is a decentralized finance platform, Preston shouted, his face turning red. And don't talk to me like that. This is my house. Is it? Sterling asked. The question hung in the air. The guests were beginning to move. It started as a trickle. Uncle Jerry lowered his glass and sidled toward the door. Barbara, the neighbor who had asked about the cello earlier, grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him toward the exit. They kept their heads down. Avoiding eye contact with Richard and Sylvia, they smelled the stench of ruin, and they wanted to be upwind of it. "Where are you going?" Sylvia cried out, her voice shrill. "Jerry, Barbara, don't leave. The food is just coming out. This is all a mistake. My mother would never do this." Sylvia turned to Sterling, tears welling up in her eyes, tears of frustration, not remorse. She played her trump card. "You are lying. My mother loves Richard. She loves Preston. She would never send the police to our home. She would never humiliate us like this over a piece of wood. You are making this up." Sterling looked at Sylvia with an expression of profound pity. "Mrs. Bracken, your mother does not love thieves, and she certainly does not love people who steal from her granddaughter." "I want to talk to her," Richard shouted. Losing control, he lunged forward, but one of the private security guards stepped in his path. A wall of muscle blocking him, Richard bounced off the man's chest. "Get me my mother on the phone. Right now I will straighten this out. She is confused. You have poisoned her mind." "You wish to speak to her?" Sterling asked calmly. "Yes. Get her on the line." Sterling reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He tapped the screen once. He did not dial. The call was already active. He held the phone up, pressing the speakerphone button. The room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Bracken," Sterling said into the silence, "they can hear you." For a moment, there was only the sound of static. Then, a voice cut through the room. It was amplified, clear, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice of Constance Bracken. But it didn't sound like the frail grandmother they thought they knew. It sounded like Judgment Day. "Hello, Richard," she said. Richard froze. His face went pale. Mom, listen to me. This lawyer of yours is insane. He is saying crazy things. We just—" "Shut up, Richard," Constance said. The command was not shouted. It was spoken with the absolute authority of a woman who had once run a shipping empire. Richard's mouth snapped shut. "I have been listening," Constance continued, her voice echoing off the charcoal walls of the media room. "I heard you bragging about your new screen. I heard you call my gift to Alara clutter. I heard you lie to your guests." "Mom, it was just an old cello," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. "We needed the money for Preston. He is in trouble. We were going to pay you back." "You sold Alara's future to buy a wet bar," Constance said. "You stole from a child. You stole from my child." "But it is our house," Sylvia screamed at the phone. "We have rights. We live here." "Ah," Constance said. "The house. Let us discuss the house." Sterling smiled. It was a small, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. He tapped the folder in his hand. "You see, Sylvia," Constance's voice continued, dropping to a lower, steelier register. "You seem to have forgotten the terms of the arrangement we made 20 years ago. I allowed you to live in the Greenwich estate. I allowed you to raise your children there, but I never signed the deed over to you." Richard's eyes widened. "What no? You gave it to us. It is the family home." "It is the family home," Constance agreed. "But you are not the head of the family. Richard, you never were. The deed to the property at 12 Oak Ridge Drive is held by the Bracken Real Estate Trust. I am the sole trustee. You are merely tenants at will." "Tenants," Preston whispered. looking around the room as if the walls were suddenly closing in on him. "And," Constance said, her voice sharpening like a blade, "the lease agreement which you signed, Richard, in 1995. Though you probably didn't read it, has a very specific clause regarding the alteration of property and the dissipation of assets housed within the property. By selling the cello and gutting the music room without my written consent, you have breached the lease." "Mom, please," Richard was sobbing now. "Don't do this." "Not in front of everyone." "Everyone?" Constance asked. "Who is left?" "Richard. Look around. Your friends are gone. The investors are gone. The only people left are the police, your lawyer, and the family you betrayed." I looked around. She was right. The guests had evaporated. The driveway was emptying as SUVs peeled away in the night. Only us, the security team, and the wreckage of their arrogance remained. "Mr. Sterling," Constance said, "execute the order." "Yes, ma'am," Sterling said. He closed the folder. He looked at Richard, then at Sylvia, then at Preston. "Richard Bracken, Sylvia Bracken, Preston Bracken," Sterling announced formally. "As the legal representative of the property owner, I am hereby serving you with an immediate notice to vacate. Your tenancy is terminated for cause, effective immediately." "You can't do that," Preston yelled. "We have rights. Eviction takes months." "Normally, yes," Sterling said. "But since this property is technically a commercial holding of the trust, and you have been using it to run an unlicensed and fraudulent investment scheme which Mr. Preston so kindly admitted to on a live stream we recorded 10 minutes ago, we obtained an emergency injunction from a judge this afternoon. It is called a writ of possession." Sterling motioned to the security guards. "You have 30 minutes to collect your personal effects," Sterling said, checking his watch. "Anything left on the premises after that time will be considered abandoned property and seized by the trust to recoup the value of the stolen instrument." 30 minutes, Sylvia shrieked. "But my clothes, my jewelry?" "I would suggest you start packing," Sterling said. "The clock started 2 minutes ago." Richard slumped against the bar, sliding down until he hit the floor. He looked at the 100-inch screen, which was still playing the abstract shapes, indifferent to his ruin. I stepped forward then. I walked past Sterling. I walked past the troopers. I stood over my father. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red, his face a mask of confusion and hate. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew she was going to do this." "I warned you," I said softly. "I told you it wasn't yours to sell. I told you it was Alara's soul. You didn't listen. You never listened to the background noise, Dad, but you are listening now." I turned to Alara, who was watching with wide, awestruck eyes. "Come on," I said. "Let's go wait on the porch. The movers need space." As we walked out, the sound of Sylvia's wailing began to fill the empty, echoing house, a mournful counterpoint to the silence of the music room. The party was over. The hangover was just beginning. The silence in the room was not the absence of sound. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a truth that had been delayed for 30 years. My grandmother's voice, amplified through the speakerphone held by Arthur Sterling, seemed to strip the wallpaper from the walls. "Richard," Constance's voice cut through the stagnant air of the media room, "you have spent your entire life confusing generosity with entitlement. I gave you a roof. I gave you an allowance. I gave you a life of leisure that you did nothing to earn, but I never gave you the deed." My father was still on the floor, slumped against the chrome leg of a bar stool. He looked up at the phone as if it were a burning bush. "But Mom, we have lived here since 95. It is our home. You said it was our home." "I said you could live there," Constance corrected, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "There is a difference, Richard. Though I never expected you to understand the nuances of property law. The estate at 12 Oak Ridge Drive is the sole asset of the Bracken Family Real Estate Trust. You are the beneficiary of a residency clause, nothing more. You are a guest who forgot to say thank you." Arthur Sterling stepped forward, opening a second folder from his briefcase. He did not look at the devastated family before him. He looked at the documents with the dispassionate focus of a surgeon reviewing an X-ray. "The terms of the residency clause are quite specific," Sterling said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Clause 14, Section B. The occupants shall make no structural alterations, major renovations, or significant changes to the character of the property without the express written consent of the trustee." And Clause 16. The occupants shall not conduct any commercial business, legal or illegal, from the premises. Sterling looked up, his eyes scanning the neon-lit monstrosity of a room. "You gutted a historic music room to build a wet bar. You painted over original millwork. You installed industrial-grade electronics that required drilling into the load-bearing studs. You did all of this without asking the owner." "We were improving it," Sylvia shrieked, clutching her pearl necklace. "We made it modern. We increased the value." "You vandalized it," Sterling said. "And to fund this vandalism, you committed a felony against a separate legal entity, the Education Trust. You robbed Peter to destroy Paul's house. It is a masterclass in incompetence, Mr. Bracken." Preston, who had been shrinking into the corner, suddenly found a scrap of his usual arrogance. He stepped forward, his hands shaking but his chin jutting out. "Grandma, listen," he said toward the phone. "You are overreacting. Okay, so maybe we didn't file the paperwork, but I needed the capital. This project, the Omnicoin, it is going to be huge. I was going to pay the Education Trust back with interest. I was going to buy the house from you. I just needed time." "Time," Constance repeated. The word hung in the air. "You do not need time. Preston, you need a lawyer." "It is not stealing if I intended to pay it back," Preston yelled, his voice cracking. "I am an entrepreneur." "You are a thief, Preston," Constance said. Her voice did not rise, but the weight of the accusation was crushing. "You are a common thief in a designer suit. You conspired with your parents to liquidate your niece's heritage because you were too lazy to get a job. You manipulated your father's weakness and your mother's vanity. Do not speak to me of entrepreneurship. You built a pyramid scheme in my living room." Preston opened his mouth to argue, but Sterling held up a hand. "Mr. Bracken, I would advise you to remain silent," Sterling said. "The federal agents who are currently reviewing your transaction history might use your admissions against you." "Federal agents," Preston whispered, the color draining from his face. "But that is a matter for another day," Sterling said, checking his watch. "Today, our priority is restitution." Sterling turned to the door. He nodded to the two private security guards standing in the hallway. "Bring it in," Sterling ordered. The guards moved aside, from the shadows of the foyer. Two men walked in. They were carrying a large, black object between them, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts or volatile explosives. It was a hard-shell carbon fiber cello case. It was scuffed on the side. It had a sticker of a treble clef near the handle that was peeling slightly. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Alara let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She took a step forward, her hands reaching out involuntarily. "We located the buyer in Manhattan at 10 o'clock this morning," Sterling narrated, his voice losing some of its chill. "He was a private collector who believed he was purchasing the instrument legitimately. When we informed him that the item was stolen property listed on the National Stolen Art File and that he was in possession of embezzled trust assets, he was very cooperative. He surrendered the instrument immediately to avoid prosecution." The guard set the case down in the center of the room, right on top of the white shag carpet that had replaced the hardwood. It sat there like an accusation, the old world reclaiming its territory from the new. "Is it?" Alara whispered, looking at Sterling. "Is it okay?" "Open it," Sterling said gently. Alara fell to her knees. She didn't care about her velvet dress. She didn't care about the people watching. She crawled to the case. Her fingers trembled as she undid the latches. Click, click, click. She lifted the lid. There it was, the Matteo Goffreler. The deep, honey-colored varnish glowed under the harsh purple lights of the media room. It looked ancient and wise, a survivor of centuries, unimpressed by the petty drama of the people who had tried to sell it. Alara reached out and touched the neck of the cello. She ran her hand down the strings. She checked the bridge. She checked the seams. Then, she laid her head against the body of the instrument and wept. It wasn't the polite, silent crying she had done for the last 2 weeks. It was a raw, primal release. She sobbed into the wood, her shoulders shaking, her entire body heaving with the relief of a mother reunited with a lost child. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her, burying my face in her hair. I smelled the rosin and the old wood scent clinging to the velvet lining of the case. It was the smell of home. "I am sorry," I whispered to her. "I am so sorry." "It is back," she choked out. "Mom, it is back." We stayed like that for a long moment, an island of pure emotion in a sea of sterile luxury. Then, the sound of a throat clearing broke the spell. "Well," Richard said. He was still on the floor, but he was trying to sit up. "Good. Great. You got the fiddle back. No harm done. Right, Mom? Look, the girl has her toy. Now call off the dogs. Let's talk about this eviction nonsense like adults." Sterling looked down at my father. He closed the briefcase with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel. "There is no talking, Mr. Bracken," Sterling said. "The breach of trust is irreversible. The violation of the lease is total." "But where will we go?" Sylvia wailed, looking around the room as if the walls were about to dissolve. "This is our home. We have lived here for 30 years. You can't just throw us out on the street. You have significant assets in your own name. Do you not?" Sterling asked coldly. "Or did you spend all of your own savings on this?" He gestured to the room. "Renovation." Sylvia went pale. She looked at Richard. Richard looked away. "We have some liquidity issues," Richard mumbled. "The market has been tough." "Translation," Preston muttered. "Dad is broke too." "Then I suggest you find a hotel that accepts credit cards," Sterling said. "Because as of this moment, your right to occupy this property is revoked. You are trespassing." "Mom!" Sylvia screamed at the phone, her voice shredding with panic. "Mom, stop this! You are hurting us. You are humiliating us. How can you be so cruel? We are your family." "Cruel." Constance's voice came back, sharp and hard. "Sylvia, cruelty is selling a 12-year-old's dreams to buy a wet bar. Cruelty is telling your daughter she is emotional while you rob her blind. Cruelty is raising a son to be a parasite and then unleashing him on the world." "I did my best," Sylvia sobbed. "You did your worst," Constance said, "and I am done enabling it. I am 90 years old. Sylvia, I do not have time to wait for you to grow a conscience. I am cleaning my house. Truly cleaning it this time, not just moving the furniture." "But who will live here?" Richard asked, his voice hollow. "It is a massive estate. You are in France. You going to let it sit empty just to spite us?" "No," Constance said. "I am not letting it sit empty. I am returning it to the branch of the family that actually understands the value of what is inside it." I looked up from the cello. I looked at the phone. "Lorelei," Constance said. "Yes, Grandma," I whispered. "Do you have your keys?" "Yes." "Good. Keep them. You will need them. Mr. Sterling has the new deed in his briefcase. As of this morning, the property at 12 Oak Ridge Drive has been transferred into a new trust." "A new trust?" I asked. "The Lorelei and Alara Bracken Living Trust," Constance declared. "It is your house now, Lorelei." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the cello case to steady myself. "Mine?" I asked. "But I can't afford this place." "The taxes, the upkeep." "The trust is fully endowed," Constance said. "I have liquidated your father's inheritance, the portion he was going to receive when I died, and I have placed it into the maintenance fund for the house. He spent his portion early, you might say." Richard let out a sound like a balloon deflating. "You cut me out of the will." "You cut yourself out." "Richard," Constance said, "with a saw. When you renovated the music room, "This isn't fair," Preston yelled, throwing his hands up. "Lorelei gets the mansion. She is an auditor. She is boring. I am the one with the vision." "Your vision," Sterling interjected, "is currently being investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I would save your breath for your defense attorney. Mr. Bracken." Sterling turned to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were not the spare keys I had. They were the master keys. The heavy iron keys to the gates, the brass keys to the wine cellar, the silver keys to the front door. He held them out to me. "Ms. Bracken," Sterling said formally, "on behalf of the owner, welcome home." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my hands were steady. I looked at the keys in his palm. Then I looked at my parents. They looked small. For 34 years, they had loomed over me like giants, criticizing my choices, mocking my job, dismissing my daughter. They had made me feel like a guest in my own life. Now, stripped of the house, stripped of the pretense, they were just two aging, selfish people sitting on a white shag carpet they couldn't pay for. I reached out and took the keys. The metal was cold and heavy. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said. I turned to my father. "Dad," I said. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Lorelei, honey, you can fix this. You can let us stay. Just until we get back on our feet. We are family." I looked at Alara, who was wiping the tears from her face, her hand resting protectively on the neck of the cello. I remembered the text message telling us not to come. I remembered the decluttering. I remembered the sound of the electric violin he suggested she play. "No," I said. "What?" Richard blinked. "No," I repeated, my voice stronger. "You have 30 minutes. Mr. Sterling said 30 minutes. You have wasted 5 of them arguing." "You would kick your own parents out," Sylvia gasped. "After everything we did for you." "You did nothing for me," I said, realizing it was true. "You tolerated me, and then you robbed me. Get out." "Lorelei," Preston started. "Get out," I screamed. It was the first time I had raised my voice since entering the room. It was a roar. It echoed off the acoustic deadening walls, filling the space with a power that the subwoofer could never match. Richard flinched. Sylvia recoiled. Preston took a step back. They saw it then. They saw the change. The invisible daughter was gone. The owner had arrived. Sterling nodded to the security guards. "Assist them with their packing. Ensure they only take clothing and personal toiletries. The furniture, the electronics, and the art remain. They are property of the trust." "But I bought that TV," Richard cried, pointing at the 100-inch screen. "With stolen money," Sterling reminded him. "Therefore, it is the proceeds of crime, technically. It belongs to Alara now." Alara looked up. She looked at the massive screen, then at her grandfather. "I don't want it," she said quietly. "It is ugly. We will sell it," I told her. "And we will buy you the best bow in the world." The security guards moved in. They lifted Richard by the arms. They guided a sobbing Sylvia toward the door. Preston grabbed his champagne bottle, but a guard snatched it from his hand. "That stays," the guard said. I watched them being escorted out of the room. I watched their backs as they disappeared into the hallway. I heard their protests fading, replaced by the heavy thud of suitcases being dragged down the stairs. I looked at the phone, which was still in Sterling's hand. "Grandma," I said, "I am here, Lorelei." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," she said. "You have a lot of work to do. That room is hideous. You need to restore it." "I will," I said, looking at the purple lights. "I will strip it down to the studs." "Good," she said. "Now, go watch them leave. Make sure they don't take the silverware. I will talk to you tomorrow." The line clicked dead. Sterling pocketed the phone. "I will remain here until the premises are vacated. Ms. Bracken, then I will leave a detail of guards at the gate for the next week. Just to be safe." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "It was a pleasure," he said, and for the first time, he actually smiled. Your grandmother sends her love. She also said to tell you that she is updating her will to include a very specific clause about Preston. What clause? He gets $1, Sterling said. And a referral to a good public defender. I laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it felt good. Elara, I said, reaching down to help her up. Close the case. Let's go say goodbye. She latched the case. She stood up, brushing the carpet fibers from her knees. She looked around the room one last time. Mom, she said, can we paint the walls blue like the sky? We can paint them whatever color you want, I said. It is your room now. We walked out of the media room, leaving the purple lights and the silent television behind. We walked to the front door, the keys heavy in my pocket, ready to lock out the past and open the door to the future. The transition from a civil eviction to a criminal procession happened with the sudden, jarring click of metal against bone. The state trooper who had been standing silently by the door stepped forward, his boots making a heavy, authoritative sound on the marble floor that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my shoes. He did not look at Arthur Sterling. He looked directly at my father. Richard Bracken, the trooper said, his voice flat and practiced. Please place your hands behind your back. My father blinked, his face a mask of bewildered offense. He looked at the trooper as if the man were a waiter who had brought him the wrong order. Excuse me, I am being evicted. I understand that. We are leaving. I am getting my coat. You are not going to get your coat, sir, the trooper said, unhooking a pair of handcuffs from his belt. We have a warrant for your arrest issued by the district attorney's office. Arrest, Sylvia gasped, clutching the lapels of her champagne-colored gown. For what? Being late on a lease. This is insane, Arthur. Tell them this is insane. Arthur Sterling did not look at her. He was busy placing a document back into his briefcase, his movements precise and uncaring. The charge is not regarding the lease. Mrs. Bracken, the trooper clarified, grabbing Richard's wrist and twisting it behind his back with a professional efficiency that made my father yelp. The charge is commercial fraud, wire fraud, and the trafficking of stolen property across state lines. Trafficking, Richard sputtered, his face pressed against the wall near the coat rack. I sold a cello, one cello. You sold an item you did not own to a buyer in New York, the trooper recited. That buyer, Mr. Eleanor, was detained by the NYPD this morning when he attempted to insure the instrument. He was not happy to learn he had purchased stolen goods. He has filed a criminal complaint against you for fraud and theft by deception. He wants his $87,000 back, Mr. Bracken. And since you already spent it on... The trooper glanced at the neon-lit hallway leading to the media room. Speakers, you are in significant trouble. The second cuff clicked. The sound was final. It was the sound of a door locking on a life of privilege that Richard had never actually earned. My father turned his head, his eyes wild with panic. He looked at the few remaining guests who were huddled by the front door, unable to look away from the train wreck. He looked at the catering staff who were silently packing up trays of uneaten lobster. This is a mistake, Richard shouted to the room. My mother is senile. She doesn't know what she is saying, Lorelei. Tell them. I stood still, my hand resting on Alara's shoulder. I said nothing. Preston, seeing his father in cuffs, seemed to realize that the family immunity had dissolved. He began to back away slowly, edging toward the side door that led to the garage. He looked like a cornered rat looking for a sewer grate. He kept his head down, trying to make himself small, trying to blend into the shadows. Going somewhere, Mr. Bracken? Arthur Sterling's voice cut through the foyer like a whip. He hadn't even looked up from his watch. Preston froze. He turned slowly. I need to call my lawyer. I am leaving. You can call your lawyer from the booking station, Sterling said. Nodding to the two private security guards, they stepped forward, blocking the side exit. You see, Preston, when we uncovered the theft of the cello, we had to audit the accounts to trace the funds. That audit revealed some very interesting transaction patterns regarding your Omni Coin project. That is proprietary business information, Preston squeaked. his voice jumping an octave. "It is a Ponzi scheme," Sterling said, saying the words with the distaste one might use for a cockroach. "You accepted investments from family members and neighbors, funneled the money into an offshore account in the Caymans, and used new investments to pay out dividends to early backers. That is not decentralized finance. Preston, that is federal securities fraud." "You can't prove that." "I don't have to," Sterling said, smiling that cold, shark-like smile. "I forwarded the forensic accounting report to the FBI field office in New Haven about 2 hours ago. They are very interested in how you promise 200% returns on a token that doesn't exist on any blockchain." Preston's legs seemed to give out. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor, mirroring the position his father had taken in the media room moments before. The arrogance that had fueled him for 36 years evaporated, leaving behind a terrified boy in a ripped t-shirt. "FBI," Preston whispered. "They should be arriving shortly," Sterling noted. "I would suggest you do not run." It adds to the sentencing. The room was silent save for the heavy breathing of my father and the soft, terrified whimpering of Sylvia. The empire of the Bracken family built on bluster, debt, and the indulgence of a woman in France had collapsed in less than 20 minutes. Sylvia looked around the foyer. Her husband was in handcuffs. Her son was awaiting federal agents. Her guests were staring at her with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. She realized, with terrifying clarity, that she was alone. Her eyes landed on me. She rushed forward, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. She grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my skin. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and desperation. "Lorelei," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Lorelei, baby, please, you have to stop this. Talk to Mr. Sterling. Talk to Grandma. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I looked at her hands on mine. These were the hands that had pushed me away when I wanted a hug as a child. These were the hands that had waved me off when I asked for help with tuition. "Lorelei, we are your parents," she sobbed, trying to pull me into an embrace. "We made a mistake. We are sorry, but you can't let them take your father to jail. You can't let them ruin Preston. Speak up for us. You are the sensible one. You are the good daughter. Fix this." I pulled my hands away. I stepped back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear. Yes, but I also saw the calculation. Even now, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a service. She wanted me to be the buffer, the fixer, the shock absorber, the role I had played my entire life. I remembered the media room. I remembered the cold, dismissive look in her eyes when she held her wine glass and told me the cello was trash. I remembered her saying, "If it is in my house, it is my trash." "Mom," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of an auditor reading a bankrupt balance sheet. "Yes, darling," she asked, hope flaring in her eyes. "Do you remember what you told me 2 weeks ago?" I asked, "when I begged you not to sell the cello, when I told you it was Alara's life." "I was stressed," she stammered. "I didn't mean it." "You said I was being dramatic," I continued. "You said I was useless. You said I was the liability." "No, never," she lied. "You did," I said. "And you know what? You were right about one thing. I am useless." Sylvia blinked, confused. "What?" "I am just the useless daughter," I said, repeating the phrase she had used to describe me to her friends at Bridge Club for decades. "I am just the invisible girl who counts numbers. I don't have influence. I don't have power. I certainly don't have the ability to interfere in a federal investigation or a criminal theft case." "Lorelei, don't say that," she whispered. "I am powerless." "Mom," I said, and the words tasted like ambrosia. "I cannot help you. This is grown-up business, and as you always told me, I should not interfere in the affairs of the adults." Sylvia stared at me. The hope in her eyes died. replaced by the horror of realizing that the weapon she had forged, my own sense of worthlessness, was now being used to sever her lifeline. "You are enjoying this," she hissed, her face twisting into a snarl. "No," I said honestly. "I am not enjoying it. I am just done." The state trooper cleared his throat. "Ma'am, step aside. We are moving the prisoner." He pushed Richard forward. My father walked past me. His head hung low. His shoulders slumped. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, counting the tiles of the house he had lost. The front door opened. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and wet leaves. The flashing red and blue lights of the cruiser bounced off the crystal chandelier in the foyer, turning the opulent entryway into a cheap disco. We watched them lead Richard down the steps. We watched them push his head down to protect it as he was placed into the back of the police car. It was a humiliation so complete it felt scripted. Arthur Sterling checked his watch again. He looked at the remaining members of the Bracken clan: Sylvia, Preston, and Preston's wife, Crystal. "The warrant for Mr. Richard Bracken has been executed," Sterling announced. "However, the eviction order stands for the rest of you. You have 22 minutes remaining to vacate the premises." He turned to the security guards. "Escort Mrs. Bracken and Mr. Preston to their rooms to pack. 1 suitcase each. Essentials only. No jewelry, no electronics, no designer handbags that were purchased with trust funds." "This is impossible," Sylvia wailed. "My pills, my creams." 21 minutes, Sterling said. Crystal, who had been standing near the door clutching her dog and her champagne glass, suddenly moved. She walked over to where Preston was sitting on the floor. Preston looked up at her. "Babe," he said, his voice weak. "Babe, you have to call your dad. Ask him to bail me out. Tell him it is a misunderstanding." Crystal looked down at him. She looked at the ripped jeans. She looked at the sweat on his forehead. She looked at the future he had just promised her, a future of yachts and parties dissolving into indictments and prison visits. She took a sip of her champagne. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she pulled the massive diamond ring off her left hand. "My dad warned me about you," Crystal said. Her voice was not sad. It was annoyed. "He said you were all hat and no cattle. I guess he was right." "Crystal, wait," Preston pleaded. Reaching for her ankle, she stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were contagious. She dropped the ring. It hit the marble floor with a sharp ping, bounced once, and rolled toward the heating vent. "That is a cubic zirconia, by the way," Preston mumbled, burying his face in his hands. "I couldn't afford a real one." Crystal's jaw dropped. She looked at the ring, then at Preston, then at me. She didn't scream. She just let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You are a joke, Preston," she said. She turned on her heel, her sequined dress shimmering, and walked out the front door without looking back. She stepped over the threshold and into the night, calling an Uber before she even reached the driveway. "And then there were 2, Sterling noted dryly. The guards hoisted Preston to his feet. They took Sylvia by the arm. My mother and brother were led up the grand staircase, the staircase they had walked down so many times with their noses in the air. Now, they were being marched up it like prisoners being transferred to a cell. The foyer was suddenly empty, save for Sterling, the guards, Alara, and me. The media room down the hall was silent now. The music had been cut, but the door was open, and the purple light still spilled out into the hallway, illuminating the spot where the cello case sat. It looked like a crime scene. The red ribbon on the floor looked like police tape. The spilled champagne on the bar looked like evidence. And it was a crime scene. It was the scene of a murder, the murder of a family myth. The myth that money made you good. The myth that blood required loyalty even when that blood was toxic. I walked over to the bench by the door and sat down. Alara sat beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "I don't know," she said. "Is it bad that I don't feel sad?" "No," I said. "It is not bad. I feel—" She struggled for the word. "I feel like I just took off a really heavy backpack. I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. The weight of their expectations, their criticism, their demands, it had all been lifted. The house was big and empty and quiet, but it wasn't the scary kind of quiet anymore. It was the quiet of a blank page. "We have a lot of cleaning to do," I said, looking at the muddy footprints the troopers had left on the marble. "Yeah," Ilara said. "But we have the cello." "Yes," I said, kissing the top of her head. "We have the cello." We sat there and waited for the clock to run out. We listened to the sounds of suitcases being zipped and muffled arguments from upstairs. We waited for the final exit. We waited for the rain to wash the driveway clean. We waited for our lives to begin. The 30 minutes Arthur Sterling had allotted for the dismantling of the Bracken dynasty passed not with a bang, but with the pathetic, shuffling sound of expensive luggage being dragged across wet pavement. The grand exit my parents had likely imagined for themselves, a retirement to a sun-drenched villa in Florida or a yacht in the Mediterranean, had been replaced by a forced march to the curb of the house they no longer owned. I stood in the foyer, watching the clock on my phone tick down. 28, 29, 30. "Time is up," Sterling said, closing his briefcase with a final, satisfying snap. "The writ of possession is now fully in effect. Anyone remaining on the property who is not authorized by the trust is subject to arrest for criminal trespassing." The security guards did not need to be told twice. They swept the upper floors and the back rooms, ensuring that the cancer of my family's presence had been fully excised. They escorted Preston, who was now weeping openly into the sleeve of his hoodie, out the side door. They guided Sylvia, who was clutching a plastic bag full of toiletries like it was a lifeline, down the front steps. I walked out onto the front porch. The heavy oak door remained open behind me, spilling warm, golden light onto the wet stone. The New England weather, always a dramatic accomplice to misery, had turned. The drizzle from earlier had thickened into a cold. Relentless rain, a biting November downpour that smelled of dead leaves and freezing mud. Down at the end of the driveway, just beyond the wrought iron gates that marked the boundary between my property and the rest of the world, stood the remnants of my family. The state trooper had allowed my father to stand by the open door of the cruiser for a moment, perhaps out of pity, or perhaps because he wanted to witness the finale of this tragedy. Richard Bracken stood in the driving rain, his hands cuffed behind his back. His expensive polo shirt soaked through and clinging to his skin, his hair, usually combed over to hide the thinning spots, was plastered to his skull. He looked small. He looked like a wet rat that had been flushed out of a storm drain. Sylvia stood next to him, shivering violently, her champagne gown ruined by the mud splashing up from the road. Preston was sitting on his suitcase, his head in his hands, looking at his sneakers as the rain turned the pavement around him into a dark mirror. Arthur Sterling stepped up beside me on the porch. He was holding a heavy ring of keys iron, brass, and silver that jingled softly. "Here," Sterling said, pressing the cold metal into my palm. "These are the master keys to the estate. The electronic codes have already been reset. The gate clickers in their cars have been deactivated. The locks on the back doors were changed by the locksmith 10 minutes ago." I closed my fingers around the keys. They felt heavy, anchoring me to the earth. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "Your grandmother was very specific," Sterling said, looking out at the rain. "She wants you and Ilara to sleep here tonight. She said the house has been holding its breath for 20 years, and it needs to exhale. It needs life. It needs you." "We are staying," I said, looking at the stone pillars of the porch. "This is our home." Down at the street, my father looked up. He saw me standing on the porch, bathed in the light of the house he had claimed was his for 3 decades. He saw the keys in my hand. The realization that the power dynamic had permanently shifted seemed to snap something in his brain. The shock wore off, replaced by a surge of impotent, venomous rage. "You ungrateful witch!" Richard screamed. His voice was hoarse, tearing through the sound of the falling rain. He lunged against the car, straining against the cuffs. "You did this. You planned this. You stole our house. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just watched him. I took you in," he roared, his face turning a blotchy purple. "I fed you. I let you live in my world. And this is how you repay me, by throwing your own mother out on the street. You are garbage. Lorelei, you are nothing. You are a thief." Sylvia joined in, her voice shrill and breaking. "How are we supposed to live? Where are we supposed to go? You have to let us back in. It is raining. Have some mercy." Mercy. I whispered the word to myself. I thought about mercy. I thought about the mercy they showed Alara when they sold her cello to a stranger. I thought about the mercy of a decluttering that was actually a robbery. I thought about the mercy of 60 years of gaslighting, of telling me I was the useless child while they drained the family fortune. There was no mercy left in the tank. The tank was dry. Alara stepped out onto the porch behind me. She was still wearing her blue velvet dress. Now slightly wrinkled from kneeling on the floor, she was holding the Matteo Goffriler cello by the neck in one hand and her bow in the other. She didn't have the case. She had left the case inside. She walked to the edge of the porch steps. The overhang protected her from the rain, but she was close enough to the edge that the spray misted against her face. She looked down the long, winding driveway at the three people standing in the mud. She looked at her grandfather, who was still screaming obscenities. She looked at her grandmother, who was weeping for her lost jewelry. She looked at her uncle, who was staring at the ground in defeat. Alara didn't say a word. She didn't shout back. She didn't cry. She looked at me. Her eyes were clear, focused, and burning with a terrifying intensity. "Mom," she said softly, "the acoustics out here with the stone floor and the rain are really good, aren't they?" I looked at the high arch of the portico. I looked at the way the stone walls would catch and amplify the sound. "Yes," I said. "They are perfect. Do you want to test them?" Alara nodded. She sat down on the top step of the porch. She spread her knees, positioning the cello between them. She extended the end pin, driving the sharp metal tip into the grout between the expensive slate tiles. She tightened her bow. Down at the gate, Richard was still yelling, "Answer me. You owe us. You owe us everything." Alara placed the bow on the strings. She didn't tune. She didn't hesitate. She raised her arm, and then she brought it down with the force of a hammer strike. Da-da-da-da! The opening notes of Beethoven's symphony number. 5 exploded from the instrument. It was not a gentle sound. It was a declaration of war. It was 4 notes that shook the very foundations of the house. Da-da-da-da. The sound was massive, guttural, and violent. The cello, happy to be back in the hands of its master, roared. The acoustics of the porch acted like a cathedral, amplifying the sound and projecting it down the driveway like a physical wave. Richard stopped screaming. He looked up, his mouth hanging open. Alara dug into the strings, her bow arm moving with a ferocious speed. She wasn't playing the timid, polite etudes they had ignored for years. She was playing the music of fate knocking at the door. The notes were sharp, staccato, tearing through the humid air. The deep, resonant growl of the C-string vibrated in my chest. It felt like the house itself was singing. Sylvia put her hands over her ears. The sound was too big, too real for her to handle. It was the sound of truth, and truth was something she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Alara's face was twisted in concentration. Her eyes locked on the figures at the gate. She played for them. She played for the years of silence. She played for the clutter. She played for the electric violin they wanted her to buy. She played the soundtrack of their destruction. The music swirled around us, mixing with the thunder that rumbled overhead. It was a symphony of vengeance. I saw the state trooper gently guide Richard's head into the back seat of the cruiser. My father looked back one last time, his face pale and ghostly behind the rain-streaked glass. He couldn't hear his own voice anymore. He could only hear the cello. Preston stood up and dragged his suitcase toward the Uber that had just pulled up. Looking like a beaten dog, Crystal had already vanished. I stepped back toward the heavy oak door. I placed my hand on the brass handle. "Play, Alara," I whispered. "Play them out." Alara transitioned into the second theme, the music becoming even more frantic, more driving. It was a sound that said, "I am here, I am loud, and I am never going to be quiet again." I looked at Arthur Sterling. He gave me a small, respectful nod. I looked at the driveway one last time. The police car was pulling away, its red taillights blurring in the rain. The Uber was turning around. The driveway was empty. They were gone. I began to close the door. The heavy wood moved smoothly on its hinges. The gap between the warmth of the house and the cold of the rain began to narrow. I watched the wet world disappear inch by inch. The music did not stop. It grew louder as the space enclosed it. Alara was still playing on the steps, safe under the roof, her music acting as a shield that nothing could ever penetrate again. I pushed the door until the latch clicked. Thud. The sound of the lock engaging was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The screen went black. But the music, that powerful, triumphant, undying sound of the cello, continued to ring out in the darkness, echoing forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your city or country so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing the Bracken family get what they deserved, please subscribe to the BitterSweet Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.